Have you ever been driving around, seen a brand new building, and just thought, how in the world did that get built right there? Well, today we're going to pull back the curtain on all those invisible rules that literally shape the world around us. We're going to demystify how California's land use rules actually work, and by the end of this, you'll have a much better handle on how your own neighborhood gets built.
So here's our game plan. First, we're going to talk about where the government even gets the power to plan our communities. Then, we'll dive into how they draw the lines with something called zoning. After that, we'll look at how those rules sometimes get bent, what it really takes to get a building off the ground, and finally, we'll talk about the government's ultimate trump card in this whole game.
All right, first things first, where does this all even come from? It all starts with a core legal idea that gives the government the right to say anything at all about your property. Let's get into it.
I mean, it seems like it should be a simple question, doesn't it? But the answer, well, it's way more complex than you might think. It's not just one person making a call. Nope, it's an entire system. And that system is built on one foundational principle of government power.
And here it is. It's called police power. Now, before you get the wrong idea, this has absolutely nothing to do with police officers. It's the basic built-in authority that a government has to make rules to protect the public's health, safety, and general well-being. Think of it as the legal foundation for everything from stop signs to, you guessed it, rules about what you can build on your land. So, with that power in hand, a city or county creates what's called a general plan. This is basically the community's big picture vision. It's the blueprint, the wish list for what that community wants to be in 10, 20, or even 30 years. But you know, a vision is just an idea. To make it real, you need a specific rulebook. And that rulebook is called zoning. This is where that high-level, dreamy general plan gets translated into concrete black and white rules for every single piece of property in town. At its heart, zoning is a pretty straightforward concept. It's about carving up a city into different districts, residential over here, commercial over there, industrial way over there, and basically setting the rules for what can happen in each of those zones. And this is where it starts to look like a secret code. You'll see these symbols on city maps. R1 means you can only build single-family houses. C2 is your spot for retail shops. M1 is for things like warehouses. This code, assigned to every single parcel of land, dictates its entire future, and in doing so, shapes the character of a whole neighborhood. But, it's so much more than just saying houses here, shops there. Zoning gets super specific. It tells you exactly how tall your building can be, how big the lot has to be, how far back from the sidewalk you have to build. That's called a setback. And even how much of your property has to be left as open space. It literally sculpts the physical form of our cities.
Okay, so what if you have a great idea for a project, but it just doesn't quite fit into the neat little boxes of the zoning code? Are you just out of luck? Well, no. The system has a couple of built-in pressure release valves for situations just like that. And here are the two big ones. On one side, you have a variance. This is for when your property itself is unique. Let's say it's a really weird triangular-shaped lot. A variance lets you bend a physical rule, like a setback, just so you can have the same basic rights as your neighbors. On the other side, there's a conditional use permit, or CUP. This is when your project is unique for that zone, like putting a small daycare in a residential neighborhood. The city might say, okay, but they'll add special conditions to make sure it doesn't cause problems with things like traffic or noise. Okay, let's say your plan is approved. The zoning is all figured out. Now comes the really hard part, actually turning those blueprints into a real building and doing it safely and legally.
In California, construction is really governed by these three pillars of regulation. You've got the statewide housing law that sets minimum safety standards. Then you have the local building codes, which get way more detailed. And finally, you have the law that makes sure the person you hire to do the work is actually qualified and licensed.
And this is the absolute key. You can't just start digging. First, you have to take your plans to the local building department. An inspector pores over them to make sure every little detail meets the code. Only when they're satisfied do you get that all-important building permit. These inspectors are really the gatekeepers of safe construction.
But hold on, there's one more giant hurdle to clear, and in California, this one is a really big deal. It's called CEQA. This is a super powerful state law that forces agencies to stop and think about how a project might affect the environment. And that means everything from air quality and traffic to wildlife habitats.
So here's how it works. It starts with a quick check, an initial study. If everything looks okay, the project gets what's called a negative declaration, and it can move on. But if that initial check finds that there could be significant impacts, that triggers a full-blown Environmental Impact Report, or an EIR. And that, my friends, is a massive undertaking. An EIR is a deep, expensive, and time-consuming analysis that can totally change or even kill a project.
And hey, speaking of those contractor laws, here's a handy little fact for all you homeowners out there. You can actually do small jobs on your own property without needing a license. But what's the catch? The law says minor work is anything valued at less than $300. So for any project bigger than that, you've got to call in a pro. So we've gone through planning, zoning, and building. But what happens when the public absolutely needs a piece of land? Say for a new school or a highway, and the owner just does not want to sell? Well, that brings us to the final and most powerful tool in the government's toolbox.
And it's called eminent domain. This is the government's inherent power to take private property for a public purpose. It's a huge power, but it comes with one very, very important string attached. And that string is all about money. The government can take your land, but it is constitutionally required to pay you just compensation. As this quote points out, the big fight is almost never about if they can take it, but about how much they have to pay for it. And just compensation almost always means fair market value. The legal process for doing this is called condemnation. Now, it's supposed to start with a good faith negotiation. The city makes you an offer. But if you can't agree on a price, they can take you to court and use their power to force the sale. So, when you boil it all down, from that big picture police power to the tiny lines on a zoning map, all the way to the ultimate power of eminent domain, it all comes back to this one central question. It's this constant, complicated balancing act. How do we build the communities we all need while still respecting the rights of the individual who owns the land? There's no simple answer, but now you understand the rules of the game.